Hello, welcome back to the Happier Life Project, the podcast where we dive deep into mental health, wellness, and all the ways we can live happier, healthier lives. I'm your host, Gabby Sanderson, and for the next 2 episodes, we're looking at some of the perhaps lesser known or maybe less celebrated paths to healing. From the art of writing and the soothing power of coffee shops, to why feeding baby goats should absolutely be available on the NHS. We've got it all covered with today's guest. Joining me is the best-selling author, Michelle Thomas, whose first book, My Shit Therapist and Other Mental Health Stories, took the world by storm, reaching #1 on the Audible charts, even surpassing Michelle Obama and J.K. Rowling. Michelle's book is a raw, real, and often humorous take on living with mental health challenges, and her candid style has made her a powerful and relatable voice in this space, as you're about to find out for yourself. In addition to writing about mental health, Michelle has hosted a podcast based on her book, which you can check out in all the usual podcast places. And currently, Michelle is working on her second book. Due out next year, it will dive deep into the subject of regret, which is one of the most universal human experiences, but an area Michelle has discovered doesn't get enough airtime in the mental health space. But back to today's episode, which is part 1 of our conversation. Michelle is here to share her thoughts on the small, everyday moments of healing. Whether it's finding comfort in a cozy coffee shop, getting lost in a good book, or discovering peace by spending time with animals. These might not fit the traditional idea of therapy, but they can be just as impactful. And if you don't land on a great therapist, which unfortunately does sometimes happen, more so. But we're saving the therapy stories until part 2, along with unpacking the art of writing for mental health. So make sure you come back next week for that one. You know, until I had this conversation with Michelle, I hadn't really stopped to think about how much I personally get from my favourite 2 local coffee spots when it comes to boosting my mental health. Whether it's meeting a loved one for a catch-up, sipping something warm and frothy, getting caffeinated enough to tackle work from a much-needed change of scenery, aka my lounge, or just exchanging a few warm words with a friendly face behind the counter whilst waiting for my usual to go. These small moments matter. And I've been reminded, and I hope you will too, not to take coffee shops for granted, especially the independent ones, as they really are an act of self-care. So, on that note, do grab your favourite cuppa, settle in, and let's get to know Michelle as we unpack how we can nurture our mental health in these simple yet powerful ways. Ready to find a healthier, happier you? Let's get started. Michelle Thomas, welcome to the Happier Life Project podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me on, Gabby.
Thank you so much for coming on. I have listened to your book. I got it on Audible. Without sounding like a crazy lady, I felt like, wow, if we were in the same vicinity, we'd probably be friends.
I love that. Thank you. That's a really lovely compliment. And that's actually, it's not to dissuade your ego, Gabby, but that's not the first time I've heard that. That's a lovely bit of feedback, especially like with the subject matter that it is as well. I think it's really nice that it resonates with people.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad it still lands because I know the book's been out now for a few years and there's another one on the way, which of course I'm going to, and you probably can't give too much away, but we'll slip in a little bit of teasing about that one too.
Give a little reveal.
Yes. But for people that are meeting you for the first time, let's just kind of give a little bit of an overview then. You live in Bristol now, but you're
I do live in Bristol. I'm from North Wales, yes. The accent will come out as we start chatting more.
It's very soothing, so that's on point, I think.
Yeah, I think it comes out on specific words. You know, if we start talking about car insurance, then the R's will start rolling.
So your first book was a bestseller. My Shit Therapist and other mental health stories. So you've set the bar high. And again, I guess that goes back to the relatability to it. People probably read it and feel like they know you a bit because you have been so honest about your history and story.
I hope so, yeah.
And then it's also the way you come across. And I mean, obviously, you're a very good writer. So that, comes across too, and quite comedic as well. Because I laughed out loud at times when I was like, it's appropriate, but not appropriate.
Yeah, thank you so much. But I think part of the drive behind writing the book was when I got ill. I had a breakdown. I had a depressive episode. I'm still not sure if you're allowed to call it a breakdown or a depressive episode. I'm not sure which is which.
I think both is fine.
I think both is fine.
Yeah.
So I had a depressive episode in 2013, so 11 years ago, and I was about 27, I think, and everything just went wrong at once. A lot of things happened. There was about an 8-month period where my dad wasn't very well. He recovered completely, but it was just a really big shock and it was a really big fright for us all. I worked a month in Edinburgh, which anyone will tell you is, for the fringe is fantastic, but it's really, really hard work and you are on your last nerve by the end. I moved house. I moved in with a partner for the first time. I started a new job. There were just a lot of pretty major life events that all happened one after the other.
Yeah.
And would all have been manageable individually, but the compound effect of them all happening at once was that I knew that I was getting ill and that I was getting overwhelmed, but just kept putting it off and just kept going, I'm just tired. It's fine. Like, I'll just get to the weekend. I just need to get through this week. I just need to get to Christmas and then have a Christmas break.
Yeah.
And then that went on for about 3 months. And then when I did take the Christmas break and I was off for 2 weeks, I managed 3 days back at work. And then, no, I was out. I was done. I started crying on the tube and didn't stop for about 2 weeks and just had to put myself to bed. And that was, it doesn't sound like a really long time ago, but actually conversations around mental health weren't as ubiquitous as they are now. And it was really frightening. I thought I was going mad. I thought, oh God, I'm a mad person now. And I read and watched and listened to everything that I could get my hands on about depression.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it was really boring. It was all very dry. It was all in kind of the same sort of hushed tones, no one getting too excited about anything. And it was all very, very serious and very, very dry.
Yeah.
And in a way that made me feel worse because I just thought, oh my God, I've got something so bad and so frightening that you can't even talk about it like a normal human being. So as I recovered and over the years, I was writing bits and pieces. And then when it came time to write the book, I was very, very conscious that I wanted to write like a human and to, dare I say, be a bit funny about it because bits of it are hilarious. Are really, really funny, whether you're looking at them in hindsight or not. So for example, we're at the end of September now. And the seasonal changes that happened sort of at the end of August, beginning of September, they come every year and they hit me pretty hard this year. And I was just like, oh God, this is the one. This is the big one. I feel terrible. This has been coming for years. It's just been building up and I feel really dreadful and really depressed and I can't really do anything and I can't think straight. And actually, no, it's just seasonal depression. It's fine. It happens every year and it'll pass. So that's kind of, I think finding those moments of levity where you can is so important and really helps sort of build your resilience against the bits that maybe you can't find so much levity in and that you do need some additional support for.
Well, I'd just like to backtrack a little bit because I know let's say the big one at 27, which we just referred to. I know this from the book and it all relates into, as we're going to get into writing and therapy and particularly your journey with writing, but you were prescribed a book when it
I
wasn't, I
was.
wouldn't say you were diagnosed with anything then, but
No, I
you were
wasn't.
a
No, I was a
teenager, weren't you?
teenager. Yes.
Yeah.
I was about 15 and I grew up in a really small town. I didn't have very many friends. I felt really isolated. I felt very alone. I felt like the only person in the world who's ever felt that way. And this is pre-internet, kids. This is in the prehistoric times
Yeah.
where, the only mental health resource was, maybe an agony aunt in Just 17 every 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and I was watching telly one day and it was Blue Peter, which we weren't really a Blue Peter household, but it was on. And they were doing a program about autism. One of the things that they said was autistic people tend to be very intelligent and they tend to find it quite difficult to make friends. It's not a particularly nuanced summary, but this is Blue Peter in the year 2000, I think. So a very different conversation to the conversation that we're having now. And I heard that and I went, I'm autistic. I have a word for this. This is what I am.
Right.
I knew there was something wrong with me, and this is it. Hurrah! And I took myself to the GP. I didn't tell my parents. I took myself to the GP and said, sat him down, looked him straight in the eye and said, I think I have autism. And he said, okay, why do you feel that way? Why do you think that?
Mm.
And it all came out. And I burst into tears and told him how I was feeling, about how I felt like completely alone and that my brain didn't work the way other people's brains seem to, and that other people seem to have a cheat code for life that I didn't have access to. And he didn't laugh at me. He didn't tell me off for wasting his time. His response was, he just listened and then he said, okay. Have you read The Catcher in the Rye? And I said, no, I hadn't. And he wrote it down. He took his prescription pad and he wrote down J.D. Salinger, Catcher in the Rye. And he handed it over to me and he said, this will make you feel normal. And I read the book and it did nothing. I couldn't relate to it at all because Holden Caulfield is a 15-year-old boy who steals his parents' credit card to hire a sex worker. And where was I going to find a sex worker? I didn't even know if my parents had a credit card. It just wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't the solution that I think the doctor
But it was weirdly
seemed to think it
fated,
was.
though,
But
wasn't it? Because of how your life's unfolded. Please carry on. But I just thought, considering your world is stories and it has been like mental health and stories, the fact that that was your first introduction, I suppose, into seeing a doctor about your mental health and he prescribes you a book. I thought that was quite cosmic.
Yeah. And it was absolutely the right thing for the right patient. And I'm not saying that, it's a great idea for doctors to prescribe literature.
And especially
in general.
Yeah. And not even one on self-help either.
Yeah. And I mean, I say this now, I think it's really important to say I've been on citalopram for 10 years. I take 20 milligrams every day to this day. Drugs are fantastic. Please don't be afraid to try them, as well as, if not over, literature. But I will say that as a 15-year-old who perhaps didn't have a diagnosis and wasn't really in a place to start exploring a diagnosis, just to have someone listen and to diagnose the problem, which was I needed a way out. I needed to know that the world was bigger than me and my brain and my school. And that's exactly what he did. And I'm really grateful to him to this day.
I love that story. I really do. So from that encounter then to 27, which is when I guess you were first prescribed medication for your mental health.
Yes.
I mean, still, it's quite formative years, aren't they? So
yes,
you were genuinely sort of getting by. Like, how was your mental health between these two parts?
I mean, we didn't really. It wasn't really a conversation that existed then. There was no "how are you feeling?" Do you want to talk about it? There was no conversation around managing mental health. The only conversations around mental health were around people who were already suffering poor mental health, and they were severely, severely stigmatized.
Mm.
There was a huge and unfair stigma around mental health, which prevented, so many people from getting help, and we can only guess how much damage it did at the time.
Mm.
So no, going through uni, being at school, I can look back now and go, oh, I was a really anxious person. I
Mhm.
was a really anxious person because I can identify sort of key moments of, going to clubs, going clubbing as a student and looking at my watch at 1 o'clock and going, oh God, there's 2 more hours. But you're drinking and you're out, and that's you're told that this is the definitive student experience.
Yeah.
And I think we didn't have a lot of stories about how different sorts of humans work. It
Mm.
was only that one story. Students get drunk and go out. Students, your 20s are for toxic relationships. Your 20s are for, working a certain kind of job. And your success is tied to your career and how productive you are. So
Mm.
when I was at uni, I started working in the summers at the Edinburgh Fringe for a comedy company. And then when I graduated, I continued to work for them for ad hoc for a bit. And then after that year, being 27 and at uni, I was offered a full-time job at the company.
Yeah.
And I was like, I've made it. I'm a booker. I've got famous people's phone numbers in my phone. I can go to, I went to tapings for Have I Got News for You and different, Christmas specials at the BBC where they, put on an amazing spread with 5 kinds of cheese. And, I met celebrities and all that sort of stuff. And I clung to the status of that, and it did come with a specific kind of status.
Yeah.
But the actual job, which I dreamed of, and that was what I wanted, I backed the wrong horse. It
Yeah.
was horrible. I didn't like it at all.
Yeah.
I worked really long hours for no money
Yeah.
and wasn't valued and wasn't listened to and wasn't able to make the contribution as best that I could have
Mm.
because my talent wasn't really nurtured in that way. And it wasn't creative. And I didn't realize how fundamental creativity is to my well-being.
To your sanity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally.
I can relate to this so much. Yeah, I've done the jobs with the cool titles, but every time I've tried it because I want to do something that does bring me a bit more security, I feel it in my gut. It's a signal, and it's like,
Yeah.
there's so many people that had killed to be doing this and say they work for this company. And then it just feels off. And I had that in my notes to chat to you about because it's difficult, isn't it, as well? Because you got to pay the rent and you've got to pay bills.
Yeah.
And
especially because at the time I was living in London, because that's where creative people live and that's where the creative jobs are.
Yeah.
I remember I accompanied one of our acts to do the warm up for the Have I Got News for You Christmas special, and Daniel Radcliffe was hosting. It was really buzzy. There were loads of celebrities knocking about. It was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember looking at my watch at 8:30 going, my partner's got an lasagna on. I could be on the sofa, thinking of garlic.
Yeah.
And that was like a lightning bolt of other people would really enjoy this. Other people would see this as a perk.
Yeah.
And the fact that I don't is maybe a signal that I'm not in the right job.
Mm.
But like you say, what do you do with that information when you've got rent to pay and when you've got commitments and when all of your sense of self and sense of well-being comes from being the person, and I suspect that you were in these roles as well, being the person who gets stuff done, being the unflappable person, being the person who you can parachute into any situation and get everyone's shit in a circle and, get a hand on your shoulder and go, you did a good job, kid. Yeah. And how do you reconcile what you need with what you thought you wanted.
Mm.
And it's devastating when that realization comes. It's not a happy enlightenment.
No,
It's
no.
truly devastating.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people can kick the can down the road, can't they, as well? You're kind of waiting for that moment to take a gamble, especially if you are a
Mm,
creative person. It's something that you shared in the book about you were working in a cafe and then that
mm,
allowed you the time that you wouldn't have in one of these cool status jobs to
yeah, yeah,
give yourself enough time to focus on your passion and the ultimate career goal, I suppose, of being a paid writer, you know?
yeah.
But then you were observing other people and also how like your mental health working in the cafe interacting with people and sort of brightening up their day and maybe
Mm,
supporting their mental health a little bit. And I thought that was like a really nice way of sort of showing that, well, actually maybe you could do something that you kind of enjoy whilst you're chasing your goals. We have a lot of people, like I'd say the lion's share of our app users and our listeners are females in their 20s and early 30s. So
mm,
I bring this up to you because I think it's what a lot of, people of that age go through.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think so. I had a job that had made me ill and I couldn't do it anymore. And that felt like a massive failure. I worked sort of bits and bobs doing promo work, but I didn't work steadily for about 9 months. I was really lucky. I had a partner who could support me at the time with the basics. I didn't have any cognitive function. For the first few weeks, I would cry because I was thirsty, but I couldn't summon the energy to walk to the kitchen, get a glass, turn on the tap, fill the glass with water, and drink it. So, looking for jobs in that state isn't going to happen. And I had no choice but to just let my body and my brain recover for a bit
Mm.
and make the world really gentle and really low impact. And yeah, after 8 or 9 months, I got a job in a cafe because I couldn't handle anything that had more impact than that. But actually, what was really important was certainty and tangibility. Customer orders a coffee, you make a coffee, customer gets the coffee. Customer orders a sandwich, you make a sandwich, customer gets the sandwich. There's no kind of long timelines, there's no project management, there's none of the mental load
Yeah.
that comes with, any kind of admin or office job or any sort of corporate gig.
Mm.
It's all immediacy and it's all just coffee and cake. It's just coffee and cake. If you get it
I mean,
wrong, you're
yeah,
not going
but
to get shouted at.
were you in London at the time? Because
I
I
was
don't,
in London at the time, yeah.
right. So, but surely you would have been busy.
Yeah, it was busy,
Mm.
but at the end of those busy 6 or 8 hours, I didn't have to go home and check my emails. I didn't have to go to a gig. I
Yes.
didn't have to, scope out more gigs. I didn't have to go and schmooze with anyone.
Mm.
So I think it was so reliable and such a nice, soft job in that way, in that there was no additional mental load. The load was physical, being on your feet and completing tasks now. So there was an urgency.
Yeah.
Everything was urgent, but it wasn't important. That's the difference, I think.
Mm.
Because once an urgent thing has passed, it's passed.
Yeah.
But the important things weigh on you.
You're really selling
Um,
it to me, to be honest, because I always get frustrated at how, what's the right word? Sedentary? Is that I'm working from a screen.
yeah,
I crave doing something that's more physical, and actually
yeah,
my body, such as working in a cafe and also
yeah.
interacting with actual humans.
Interacting with actual humans was something that I didn't realize was so important. And, you touched on earlier being able to, build those tiny, not even parasocial relationships, but seeing the same people every day. And I really quickly realized that, I'd make someone's order and as the coffee was brewing, I'd go, how are you? How are you doing?
Yeah.
And I very quickly realized that sometimes I was the only person who would ask them that all day.
Yeah.
And because of that, their response would sometimes be, not great, actually, I'm going through a divorce. Or not great, actually, I'm an A&E doctor and we lost a kid tonight. And I've just come from the debrief. So actually creating a space where in the most informal
Yeah.
way,
Yeah.
just creating a tiny moment where it was all right for someone to go, this is a bit of shit actually, was something that I felt that I could do. And
Mm.
then they got a nice coffee or a piece of cake out of it as well.
No,
You
I
know?
mean, being on the receiving end of that, I can speak from my own experience. I have a local where I live, and I love going in. Not the coffee's delicious, but there's particularly one girl that works there that asks me how my family is, or when they're coming over to visit, or
Yeah.
just those kind of. And she might be the only person that I see being living on my own. That
Yeah.
one particular day. I honestly would take a cafe over a pub any day of the week.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been on the other side of that too. And this is where I think it's wonderful to live somewhere where there's a bit of diversity, so you're not just speaking with British people all the time. Not that there's anything wrong with British people, we're great. But after COVID, the cafe near me opened up for the first time. And you know how they all had those little hatches
Yeah.
at first, so you
Yeah.
queue up outside. And I ordered my coffee, and she said, "Oh, actually, you can come in. We're open." And I went into the cafe for the first time in about 2.5 years. And I lived on my own at the time as well. So I'd gone through COVID on my own. And going into the cafe for the first time, I just started welling up and started getting really teary because these are spaces where, oh, okay, you've got to pay to play, but these are spaces where it's someone else's job to make the world nice for you. I cannot tell you how much I would have paid during the pandemic for someone to make me egg on toast. I think I would have paid 30 quid
Yeah.
for 2 eggs on shit white bread just to have someone else make my life a little bit nicer for a minute.
Yeah.
So to have these spaces open up again really moved me and made me realize how important it was. And I was so embarrassed because I was crying in front of this poor lady. But luckily she was Colombian and she just like laughed at me and she just went, it's fine. Like she was just really comfortable with the display of emotion, which might not have happened in, a trendy place in
Yeah.
London.
Yeah, I love that. There's one more thing we have to do, and that's our signature sign off. It's the Happier Life Project's last 5 in 5. So it's the same 5 questions that I ask every guest to wrap
Yes.
the episode.
I'm pumped.
I can see that. Okay. When and where are you at your happiest?
I think I am happiest at my desk with 2,000 words behind me. I am happiest having written.
This might be linked. What's your favorite thing to do that nourishes your mental health?
I can't say writing for everyone because otherwise people will think I'm a really boring bastard.
If it's your truth, it's your truth.
Do you know something that I found really nourishing this summer actually is, I mean, we all know that getting out in nature is the thing. But something that I discovered this summer is near me, there's Chew Valley Park, which is an animal farm, and you pay to get in. And then once you get in, you can buy a bag of feed and get into a pen with about 30 pygmy goats. And you can feed them and they climb on you and they climb on the benches around you and you can just be surrounded by goats. And it has been, I'm not even kidding, I went twice in the summer and it was just the most genuinely healing and wonderful experience just to realize that you're part of something that's bigger and older than the internet.
Yeah.
Swimming in the sea, feeding goats, just being able to go completely offline and cuddle a goat. Honestly, I mean, it's not the most relatable mental health advice, perhaps, but I would say
really relate.
If you can get out and cuddle, 6 to 8 pygmy goats at a time, I would say is the optimal amount.
There's in Skipton, which is in Yorkshire. It's not too far actually from where the app is based. There's a farm park, and you can feed in spring baby lambs and baby cows. And I've done it a couple of times, and it's my favourite thing to do in the world because you've got like a bottle, and then they come over when it's feeding time, and you give the baby lamb or cow a bottle.
Who is more nourished, you or the baby cow? Oh,
exactly.
Yeah.
So I told you, you're so relatable. What piece of advice do you now know that you wished somebody would have told you earlier that would have made you a happier person?
You don't have to. You don't have to. If you don't want to go clubbing, you don't have to. If you don't want to watch a scary film or a really violent TV show, you don't have to. If you don't want to stay in a job that's making you unhappy, you don't have to. This is something that my mum said this a lot when I was growing up. If I was worried about school or homework or something, she'd go, "It's all right, no one's going to break your legs." And I didn't really take on board that no one's going to be angry. No one's going to think that you're an awful person if you quite simply declare what you do and don't like and do the thing that you do like instead.
Yeah. What is the most important one thing that needs to change to make the world a happier place?
Baby goats on the NHS. No. I think this is interesting, and this is an experiment that's, I believe, is happening now. They're trialing universal basic income in Cardiff for a specific group of people. So I think it's £400 a month, and it just would give people a little bit of space because everyone's working so hard. All you can think about is your rent and your bills, or your mortgage and your bills.
Yeah.
And there's no space to imagine a better life for yourself, and by extension, a better community and a better world. Because everyone is under so much pressure to simply cover the basics.
Yeah.
So I think a universal basic income, or something that would give people the space after their working day to go, all right, what do I want? What do I actually want? Can I invest in guitar lessons? Do I want to go to the pub and start a knitting circle? I think something that just gives people that little bit of power back to make themselves happy and lead more fulfilling lives. I think that would be my thing.
Oh, great.
And baby goats on the NHS.
Absolutely. Oh, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
I'm so pleased.
Gabby here. Thank you again to Michelle Thomas. And there's plenty more to come in part 2 of our conversation, where we will discuss the art of writing for our mental health. We'll also talk about bad therapy and therapists, and knowing when it's time to conclude with a good therapist. And you'll also hear Michelle's thoughts on Prince Harry's recent comment about renaming mental health mental fitness. That's all to come in next week's episode of the Happier Life Project. And thank you very much for listening to this one. It really does mean a lot. As always, I just need 1 more minute of your precious time, and that's to run through the important housekeeping. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download. You can access all of the content, and you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. If you are in crisis, or you think you may have an emergency, please do call your doctor or the emergency services immediately. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the interviewer, which is me, and the interviewees. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only, and should not be considered as a substitute for professional or medical advice. The Priory Healthcare are not involved in the production or content of this podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please do subscribe and leave a review if you're listening on one of the podcast platforms. And to find and follow us on social media, if you're not already there, we are most active on Instagram, and we are at My Possible Self, and I've been at Radio Gabby. Please do take care, and I'll see you with more of Michelle on the next one. Bye for now.